Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Friday, October 28th, 2022. And our top story today, how impact data changes how donors give. Well, Heather, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into data and how important data is in terms of making an impact and attracting charitable donations, how are Americans doing in terms of making charitable donations to not-for-profits around the country?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people making a lot of donations to a lot of places, and we've only seen that number go up over the past few years with the pandemic. And some of the things that we know about that are it's really hard to find information to make those choices. So folks end up going with somebody that they've heard of or that they know, or their brother is on the board of this thing or whatever. They tend to give when they're asked, and they tend to just kind of do it kind of ad hoc. So a lot of folks don't necessarily have a plan for how they're going to donate, and they may or may not be thinking about impact. And what I mean by impact is what kind of return are you going to get for your money?
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, that's a question that, like any consumer, you're in a way buying something, although it's an indirect product. And you bring up some really interesting points that I'd like to unpack. The first of which, brand recognition in anything is important. But if there are charitable organizations out there today who maybe don't have the quote unquote brand name, they're not the American Cancer Society or the XYZ organization, how do you reach a donor? I mean, other than social media marketing, traditional marketing, how do you reach those people to get money to your cause?
Well, it's a really, really tricky thing, because what we would love to see at my organization, Impact Genome Project, is a way for people to find organizations that make the kind of impact with the people that they want to see, changes in. And right now, you're right. It's a lot of who do you know? It's a lot of, if you're a big organization that has marketing budget, it's a lot of, even just getting the funding. Do you have a good grant writer? It's not necessarily about impact. And that's not to say that the big organizations are not producing impact. But the point is that it's really hard to find, especially those like small grassroots community-based organizations that are probably doing a lot of good, that are putting all of their resources into doing good and not necessarily advertising. So one of the things that we want to do is introduce data and metrics into the decision-making process and essentially lift up those organizations that are having really big impact and highlight that so that people can find them. And one of the ways that we do that is through a registry that we have. And the idea is to essentially, it's like shopping on Amazon. Like, you can filter down to what you're interested in. If you want to buy a computer, you can, filter down to the right size screen and the hard drive and all these things. And we don't really have a good way of doing that in this space. And that's one of the things that our study was testing was, what if you give people that kind of information? Will they use it the way that they might on Amazon to really narrow down and take all of that information into account? Or are they just, for example, going to go with the cheapest program or the one that sounds the best?
It's really important. As you mentioned the word impact, one of the topics that we've covered on this network is sustainability, ESG, impact. And to me, what that means, and it means different things to different people, is, as you said, a cause that has a direct impact on the lives of other people, the society, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit about measurement. And there's a lot of data that exists in the not-for-profit world. I think it's called the 990. Is that the correct form? And I have to think that you maybe can source some of your information from there. But tell us a little bit about the data that you and the Impact Genome Project are mining.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we get our data from a few sources. One is the 990 tax forms. So that does give us some information and things like, where do they operate, how big of a budget, but more importantly, what outcome are they focused on, and how are they doing that? We can sometimes find that information. But our bigger data source comes from the nonprofits themselves. So one of the really important concepts here is standardization. And I think people in this space can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable with that idea, like, oh, we can't standardize because every program is unique and every person's situation is unique. And that's true. But when you look across the whole nonprofit sector, there are common things that people are trying to fix, right? There's food security, there's housing, there's financial health, there's education, there's all of these things. And there's really, in our opinion, and through our work, we've seen that there's a finite number of outcomes that folks are working toward. And what I mean by outcome is a change in status, behavior, or condition of, most of the time, an individual person. Sometimes the outcomes have to do with organizations or governments or things like that. But for this conversation, let's just think of a single person. And if you think about something like food security, there's a definition of what that means. It's going to be the same definition no matter who you are. The way that you get to that might be different. And the way that you measure it actually might be different. But the concept of what it means to be food secure is the same. And so what we've done is we've standardized those definitions. So you can then parse apart something like food security, which is different from getting a meal, which is different from getting groceries for a month, which is different from eating healthy. Like, all of those things are part of food security, but they're actually different outcomes. And so at Impact Genome, we don't standardize the measurement per se. What we standardize is that outcome concept. And so once you do that, you can bring in data from nonprofits or from 990 tax forms, and you can essentially translate that into this common language of these standards. And so when you're able to do that, you're able to aggregate all of that up, you're able to compare, you're able to benchmark, you're able to do things that in pretty much every other industry is a normal, typical thing, responsible thing to do, where you're making decisions based on data. But that hasn't happened as quickly in this sector as we would like, and that's part of what's motivated our work.
Last question before we go to a commercial break, because there's a lot I want to unpack here, but I want to ask you, we're talking a lot about the consumer, but I have to think that the data, look, if you're doing a due diligence process and say you're being solicited, you're a foundation, the former Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'm sure they got lots of solicitations because they had lots of money. You're being solicited. It's a great way before you approve that grant, or the great way before you send money to figure out, to do it, as you're suggesting, search on a multitude of factors. If you're interested in, for example, food security or insecurity, you would be able to drill down, and therefore you've got some metrics and benchmarking, something, as you said, which is very common in, for example, the investment world, where you compare investments and you compare them against certain benchmarks.
Right. Yeah, and we do have clients that we work with where that is how we work with them. We essentially take in either before a grant is made. So if folks are coming in and applying for a grant, we can tell the funder, here's the range of people that are applying, or organizations that are applying. And going back to the food security example, you have a bunch that are focused on soup kitchens and getting those as needed access to meals, and you have a bunch that are more weekly or monthly food. And which of those are you most interested in supporting? Because they are different. Or are you interested in supporting the infrastructure and distributing food? And that's also different. And so the idea is, if you can bring this information in, you can bring in information on, like, how much does it cost to get an outcome? Where is this happening? What is the outcome? And you can make those kinds of comparisons. And again, if you are an organization or even an individual and you have a strategy, you have something that you're really interested in funding, this just makes it a lot easier to find those places that are doing that exact thing. So we're bringing in a lot more precision to this process that has traditionally been fairly emotionally driven and very difficult to find information to really inform.
Yeah, it's really important to have emotion, but also quantitative aspects to evaluating these opportunities. Heather, as I said, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about using data to make an impact in charitable donations. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you over 50? Would you like to get up to 33% more income in retirement? Then call now for this free book, Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers. This free book reveals little-known secrets about annuity strategies that will help you make the right choices before buying an annuity. Call right now for your free book, and as a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report, both absolutely free for calling Annuity General today.
Call 800-504-8194.
Well, Heather, thanks so much for staying with us this morning. Really appreciate you sticking around for segment number 2.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, let's talk about the marketplace here, because there's millions, billions, trillions of dollars, right, that are being put towards impact investing, making an impact on our environment. How big is this marketplace, and how does the quantification, the data, actually translate into a more positive impact of your dollar?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one of the things that we did recently was a landscape scan of what is the actual spend for social impact. So we looked at things like S-themed ESG spending. We looked at government social spend around the world, US government social spend, and global philanthropy. And if you add all of that together, it's $72 trillion a year. And so if you compare that to something like military spending, which is less than $2 trillion a year, that is a staggering figure. At the same time, there's something called the Sustainable Development Goals that have been put up by the UN. And those are kind of these big problems that we're trying to solve with social impact, like hunger and homelessness and those kinds of things. And we haven't made any progress on those for the past 2 years. And we've made very little progress. I want to say less than 5% progress over the past 5 or so years. And so this is this huge imbalance. Like, how is this possible that we're spending this much money, but we're not able to see the impact and move the needle? And so our philosophy on this is it's because it's so hard to track the impact. First of all, you have to define what impact means. And that's where those standards come into play, is those standards are defining what does it look like when somebody achieves this outcome and achieves that impact. But then you also have to understand what is the cost you should expect to get for an investment, right? So if we have a more full data set, if we have information that we can actually use to compare, again, like any other industry, where we can make smart investments in charities that are actually producing results that you can really see and measure, then I think we have a much better chance of actually solving these problems. Because right now, you might have heard the phrase spray and pray. And that seems like something that happens in this industry a lot is, well, this sounds like a really good idea, and we definitely need kids in school, so I'm going to give $1 billion to this cause. But unless you have data to say, well, what exactly is the cause? And what do you expect to see from this? So keep kids in school. Do you mean like move to the next grade, or do you mean get good grades? Or like, what does that actually mean? Having a way to measure that, and then being able to compare across charities that are doing that same thing, you can start to see like, well, we're spending $1,000 per kid to get this outcome, but the benchmark is $500. So maybe this isn't the best charity to fund because, they're spending a lot more money. And that's, I don't want to get too in the weeds with it, but that's an oversimplification, of course. Like, just because somebody is spending more money on an outcome doesn't mean they're worse. There's other factors, but that's just to give you an idea of the kinds of comparisons you can make if you have standard data.
How do we bridge the gap and move the needle? I'm going to use so many cliches. You use spray and pray. I'm going to use move the needle? How do we, but seriously, how do we get greater adoption? Because I don't, every charity, every organization wants to do good. I don't know one organization doesn't want to do good. And they want to see the best value for their dollar, their euro, whatever currency, that denomination of currency, right? How do we move the needle to get program managers, grant writers, not-for-profits on board to do exactly what you're suggesting? Do those organizations need to think about metrics in general? But how do you change? It seems like it's more of a culture shift.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a culture shift. And I think it's also in part a resource issue. So there's a lot of emphasis for nonprofits on providing data, but a lot of it, it sometimes can feel like it's data for data's sake, because again, it's not standardized. It's really hard to take data from, let's say you have a portfolio of 50 nonprofits that you funded. What you really want to do is to put all of that together, kind of like a portfolio analysis for your stock portfolio, right? You have all of that kind of in the same language where you could make these direct comparisons against these different stocks because you have this set of metrics that they all use. And that's the type of thing that you would really want to do with nonprofit investing. And so part of it, though, is that nonprofits are being asked to do this. They're not given a lot of guidance on how to do it or what's most important. And they're not often given the funding to really do it well. And so that's one issue. Another issue is that it can be very hard to find this information at scale in a way that is very usable. So again, there's lots of tools out there that bring a lot of information together where you can analyze and you can sort of direct, I'm really interested in this thing. And so I can use the software tool to find the answer to that. What happens a lot in this space is you don't have a central repository of this kind of information. You don't necessarily have tools for users to really interact with it. And so that makes it really hard to use. So that makes it really hard to justify, right? Because, well, what am I supposed to do with all this? We know that data is good, but how do I even use it? So I think a lot of it is just really just trying to get folks on board with this idea of it can't just be data. It has to be data in a particular language, let's say. There has to be like a Rosetta Stone. And again, I'm going to keep hitting on these standards because, this was the study that we did, but also that's what our work centers on is if a standard is kind of like this Rosetta Stone where you can take in information from programs, you can take in information from policy, from research, and then the funders or whomever is using it, maybe the programs themselves, can have a much better idea of what's going on and what's needed. And then, they can be really targeted in what kind of information do they need to collect, kind of feed this bigger repository of information. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And we have our nonprofit registry. So nonprofits actually can go in for free to our website, and they can start to align data that they already have with these standards. And then that's, the more places that do that, the better we're going to be, because we're going to have more to choose from. So if a funder is looking through and trying to find a specific charity that does a specific outcome, the more programs in there, the better. They're going to have more to choose from. So I think it's really just, it is a culture shift. It's kind of shifting from we need data to what do we need data for and getting really smart about that. And then how do we use the data? And I'm really positive about this because we've done this in so many other industries, and I know it's possible. And it's really just a matter of laying the foundation and laying the groundwork, which we're trying to do, and there's others out there definitely that are trying to do this. And I think it's a really exciting time because people are hungry for this, and we want to be using this money in responsible ways, and we need to be solving these problems.
Yeah, and $72 trillion is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of money. That can have a major impact. And as you're talking about this, I think about sports. I think about baseball. Yeah. Baseball, a lot of the managers used to use instinct and gut. But by the way, they all 32 Major League Baseball teams, I'm sure the minors, they have analytics departments now that say, okay, you may want to throw down a suicide bunt or a sacrifice bunt, whatever you call it, and you'll get on base. So I think that more and more industries that rely just on instinct, and instinct is great. This is not going to replace instinct, but you got to be able to back it up and say, okay, here is what the impact is. Well, Heather, we're going to have to leave it there. Really, really important work. And $72 trillion, nothing to sneeze at. Hopefully, we can make more and more of that go to really good causes. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, and all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content? We'll visit our website, and of course, all of our streaming partners. We're back again tomorrow for BRN Weekly. We'll be taking a look back at some of our best segments for the week. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
But if you're tired of the same old
Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.